Hi everybody, I'm Matt Robinson. Welcome to another edition of The Writer's Block. Well, it was bound to happen. When you have this many talented authors in the community, you're eventually going to find a husband and wife team who are both great authors, and we have just that today. For those of you who are fans of the show, you may have remembered Carmen Fields was on a few episodes ago telling us the amazing story of her late father being the African-American band leader in the Jim Crow South. Today we have Carmen's husband, Larry Finison. Larry is a social psychologist by training and a public health practitioner, and he is coming to us with the story of Kitty Knox, a biracial woman from Boston who was accepted and then rejected by the League of American Wheelmen. So another interesting story of race in society. In his book, he discusses not only the importance of Knox's life, but also that of cycling in her time and how the change in policy by the League marked a racial shift in our culture. Welcome, Larry. It's great to have you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad for the invitation to speak about Kitty Knox.
Well, you know, I mean, your wife made such a red carpet for you. She spoke so highly of you. We had to have you on, so I'm really glad to have you here. So, as a social psychologist, I'm sure that must have played a little bit into your particular interest in this story, but of course, you're also quite the avid cyclist. So, how did you come to choose this as a topic for a book?
Well, it goes a long ways back. As a psychologist, I started out writing about the psychologists' anti-fascist support for democracy in Spain in the 1930s. And that really deepened my interest in psychology and social issues. And shortly thereafter, I began doing work on racial disparities in health, particularly in chronic disease like diabetes, and then looking at all the precursors to that and how exercise could help to lower the incidence of diabetes. And that became a real passion of mine. And then I discovered Kitty Knox, who was a famed black biracial cyclist in the 1890s. And I thought she is a perfect role model to begin to explore how people can get more exercise and reduce the disparities in health that we observe. So that really got me started on the whole story. And I got to say that once I discovered Kitty Knox, it was like she got hold of me, and I couldn't shake her. And I've been writing about her for the last 15 years. And she's actually the main topic of my first book, which is Boston's Cycling Craze, 1880 to 1900, a story of race, sport, and society. And she's the central character of it. She really carries the story all the way through.
So in addition to being an avid cyclist and a fan of the sport, your public health interests, it kind of dovetailed very nicely in her story.
It all dovetailed very nicely with her story, which is why I've been pursuing her ever since. Or perhaps you could say that she's been pursuing me.
Who's leading the peloton, I guess.
That's right, there you go.
What was the research like?
Well, the research was really painstaking, as they say. It involved going back to the old cycling magazines that had material about her, going to the census, discovering one of her family members. She was a biracial woman. Her father was a black man from Philadelphia. Her mother was a white woman from Maine. And eventually I was able to track down some descendants of the Maine side of her family, and then discover it was the Toll side of her family, Towle, and eventually discovered that they had an old family scrapbook that had her picture in it. And they had no idea who it was, but we got together and were able to decipher that that was Kitty Knox.
So what, just to kind of give context, what was the history of Boston as a cycling city? Was it the hub of the universe in that way as well? Was it a popular pastime?
It certainly was. Boston is where, at least in North America, cycling got started in the late 1870s with the old high-wheel bicycles. They had already been invented and were popular in England and France and on the continent generally, but they were first introduced into Boston circa 1878. And so this became the sort of headquarters of cycling, had the largest per capita rate of cycling in the country, and membership in the League of American Wheelmen, which was the national organization that covered cycling. Several journals were published here, and so it was really the center or the hub of the universe, as you put it, and as many others have put it, for cycling during that time.
It's quite an issue of contention these days. I know that Mayor Wu has been struggling to stand up for the bike lanes versus people who want parking or the buses and things of that sort. Is Boston a good biking city as cities go these days?
Well, it's come a long ways from what it was 20 years ago, and it continues to improve. We've got a struggle going on right now. We'll have to see how that comes out. I think the cycling community is committed to solutions that really favor cyclists and pedestrians and commuters, like on buses and whatnot. So that's really the overarching aim of the cycling community now, is not to go it alone.
I see. So now to get into the micro story, how did Knox get started in cycling? What drew her to it, and why was she so dedicated to becoming part of the larger society?
Well, she grew up in Cambridge. She was born in 1874, grew up in Cambridge, in a mainly white neighborhood in East Cambridge, and went to school there, went to church there. Ultimately, in the early 1880s, her father died, and ultimately the family moved to Boston. And there she began dancing in some of the dancing balls. She became a seamstress and a dressmaker. And then, in sort of a dramatic way, one of the black newspapers out of Indiana, the Indianapolis Freeman, notes that Kitty Knox is noted for her graceful cycling around Martha's Vineyard. Well, that was really kind of surprising to me. Hey, what was she doing in Martha's Vineyard with some of her friends? Also noted that she was part of the Riverside Bicycle Club, which was an all-black cycle club in Cambridge and Boston. And that's really how she got started in the early 1890s. And she immediately said, well, I'm going to join the League of American Wheelmen, because they have all kinds of rides and clubs, and they go fast and far, and that's exactly what she wanted to do. So she joined up with the League and was kind of on her way for several years until she ran into some speed bumps, so to speak, and we could talk about those too. But she was a very dramatic figure. As I said, she was a dancer, she was a seamstress and dressmaker, and also a very fast and long rider on the bicycle. Now, it's important to note that during that time, instead of doing the gentleman's high wheelers, we got safety bicycles, equal-sized tires, better brakes, and what they call a diamond frame, a man's bike in our terminology today. And she started riding one of those, and she also wore bloomers instead of a long dress. And that created a huge backlash, particularly from some of the older women riders who traditionally wore a long dress while cycling, which was, of course, very difficult, but they thought it was more ladylike. And so they prescribed that and said she shouldn't be wearing bloomers, and she shouldn't be riding a man's bike, and she shouldn't be riding fast. So she was, they called her a scorcher. And so she was down on 3 counts already amongst the traditionalists.
Yeah, it really seems that she really wanted to set herself apart and make herself, and was she trying to make herself an example, and that she wanted other women and other people of different races to follow and to be their champion, or was she just kind of a rabble-rouser?
I think she was more of a rabble-rouser. I don't think, at least there's nothing ever published about her wanting other people to follow her lead. She just wanted to do her thing. And as I said, she grew up in a mainly white neighborhood in East Cambridge, but when they moved to Boston, they moved to the West End, which was very strongly immigrant population, Jews and Southern Italians and Southern Europeans in general, and a large black population. That was really the home of African Americans in Boston in the 1890s. It was in the old West End, right on Cambridge Street as you go up from the river up towards the City Hall now. That was their home, and that's where she lived for a number of years, from the early 1890s until 1900.
So you mentioned that there were benefits of a sort to being a member of the bicycle associations. Why was the pull so strong that she made it such a focus of her, such an effort to join the cycling organizations?
Well, when you joined the cycling organization, you got their newsletter and their magazines. You also got entree to some of their events. And so she was very keen on getting into those events, not just in Massachusetts, but beyond Massachusetts. And she knew she could do that if she joined the organization.
And you said at first it was more open to her, and then there was a change in policy or a change in administration that made it more difficult?
Well, what happened is that there had never been a bar against black cyclists up until about 1894, and then the Southern cyclists began to agitate for a change in the Constitution. And finally, even though they were a very small minority, they were able to ram through a change in the Constitution that barred black cyclists. Now, she was fortunate because she'd gotten in before the color bar happened, but that itself created a huge row in several years to come.
Were there others in her time who followed, or was she really the only member of note at that time?
Well, she was the only member ultimately of note among the black cyclists, but there were others who did join during that time period. And since there was nothing on the application form that indicated race, there was no way to know in the late 1880s and early 1890s, who was what. So, but ultimately, as I say, particularly the Kentucky cyclists started to see black cyclists on the road and kind of rose up and said, no, we don't want to have any part of this. And they were the ones who really pushed the amendment to the cyclist constitution to bar any black riders.
Were there prohibitions against riding in general, or only riding as a representative of one of these groups?
No, the prohibition against their becoming members.
Okay.
Is what it really amounted to.
Do you, going back to the health study of the benefits and the impact, like you said, about diabetes, which is often stronger in the African American community, was this a challenge? Did this cause an obstacle to better health outcomes for that community because they weren't being encouraged to join or to exercise in this way?
Well, that's very hard to say historically. For sure, one of the things that happened during the late 19th century is that there became many more barriers to black people getting involved in sports teams. Immediately after the Civil War and up until the 1890s, things were, I would say, relatively open. That's a relative term, particularly in the northern part and particularly in Massachusetts. But that whole kind of clamped down during the period of about 1895 through 1900 and a little beyond. Things got worse instead of better, and she happened to be active during that exact time when things have gotten worse.
Did her sort of pushing the envelope make things worse in a way? Was the reaction against stronger because of how active she was in trying to make change?
Well, I think to some degree that's true. The cyclists from Louisville and other parts of the South were really incensed when she showed up at Asbury Park, New Jersey for the national meet of the League of American Wheelmen. They called her all kinds of names. One of my favorites is that they called her the murky goddess of Beanville. And I thought that was really kind of amazing.
That's colorful.
Yeah, I thought that was really kind of an amazing thing to throw at her. And I use that term whenever I can, because I love the fact that they referred to her as being from Beanville. Even in those days, Boston was known as the hub of the universe in Beanville.
Beanville, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So again, widening out, what were the social and societal implications outside of the cycling community for her actions and her, what could be seen as maybe political action?
Well, I don't think she intended them as political action. It was a very personal kind of thing for her. She wanted to ride fast and ride long. And that was kind of the extent of her activity. Although, when she was at Asbury Park for the national meet, they refused her a badge. And then some of the Boston cyclists spoke up for her and said, no, she's a member, has been a member, and will always be a member as long as she pays her dues. And so they were very adamant about that. Ultimately, she got a badge at the meet. She was treated as kind of a heroine when she came back to Boston. They had her as a pace setter for one of their big rides. And so things went very well. But then one of the Boston clubs said, we're going to have a century ride, and black cyclists are not invited.
What prompted that change?
I think there was a certain minority at that time of Boston cyclists who wanted to follow the league's overall prohibition against black riders, and decided that they didn't want her. And at the same time, there were 15 black male riders who signed up for the same ride. And the club said, no, we can't have that. And so all of them were sort of barred from the ride. And then in the next few years, it went back and forth and back and forth. She was accepted at some century rides. A century ride, by the way, is 100 miles. Right. And she was not accepted at other century rides by different clubs. And that went on all the way through from 1895 through the last ride that I know she was on is in 1899. And so she was a very strong rider, I think a courageous rider. There are many notes about her riding with a group of people, and the rainstorm or the windstorm would come up, and the rest of the riders would take the train, and she would refuse, and with a small group of riders would go on to their destination. And I always thought that was a real interesting part of her perseverance. It was not just against the bars to her because of her color. It was also for her in terms of her desire to ride fast and ride long, and her courage, really. One other piece that she fought against was that notion that women riders had to wear a long skirt. She refused that. She wore a short skirt or bloomers, and was denounced by some of the women riders again because she wasn't wearing a long skirt.
Well, she was using the man's frame with the crossbar.
Exactly. She had the man's frame, the crossbar. She wore bloomers or knickerbockers. And we have photographs of her during that era dressed just that way. And so she was booed and hissed at some places, but very well applauded. At the same time, she was involved in a big cycling costume contest in Waltham at the track out there, and she got both hisses and applause, and she eventually won the contest. And that was quite a striking event, and I'm pretty clear that she won it because she was able to sew her own costume. She was a dressmaker.
Right.
So she made up her own costumes, and that's the reason I think why she won the contest out there in 1895.
So she was able to promote herself in other ways.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Now you mentioned that there were other African American riders who were prohibited from certain events. Did they start their own splinter groups, or did they just sort of fade into history?
They had their own club, which was called the Riverside Cycle Club. And she was kind of in the ladies' auxiliary for that. And one writer noted that she was frequently the only woman cycling with that group. That was very typical at the time, that there were all male clubs, and there were a couple of all women's clubs in Boston in the 1890s. And many times they would meet up for picnics out at Norumbega Park in Auburndale, right where the Marriott Hotel is now. And they would meet out there on a sunny Saturday or Sunday afternoon and picnic together and so on. But it would be a meeting between two clubs. And it was one way in which women got to, young women particularly, got to cycle without having a chaperone because they were with the club.
I see.
On the other hand, they also met up in these wooded lands out near the Charles River in Auburndale.
Where were the main indoor tracks that people, like for spectators and for races and things like that?
Well, there were no indoor tracks at the time,
Oh.
and they were all outdoor. There was one in Waltham, one in Cambridge. Eventually, there was a board track over in Revere that lasted even until the 1930s. But the Waltham track went out about 1905, and so did the Cambridge track. The rest of them were all borrowed horse tracks. Where, you know, they ride horses on them, and then, okay, you want to have a bicycle ride after the horses? Fine. It was a heavy road to hoe, so to speak,
Yeah.
to bicycle on those tracks.
What happened to bike culture that we don't have this popularity and this importance of being in the clubs anymore? What changed in cycling culture and in Boston culture?
Well, what happened is that eventually the gentleman who had originally founded bicycling got disturbed because all these other people, like the immigrants, started bicycling. There was a Boston Italian Wheelmen's Club, and they would follow the old gentlemen on their rides out to Needham, for example, to visit the big digs out in Needham when they were hauling away gravel for the filling in the back bay.
Right.
So they would come out to Needham and then discover that the Boston Italian wheelmen were following them out, or perhaps the Riverside Cycle Club. And they were not happy with the sort of downclassing, let's put it that way, of cycling. And they said, well, we're not going to do that for our recreation anymore. We're going to join a country club. And the country clubs were coming up just at that time.
I see.
So that was a great opportunity for them to kind of retreat from the world of city life and without bicycling out in the countryside.
You mentioned an Italian American group. Were there other groups for different racial and social communities?
There were a few. There was one group called the Eagles, which was mainly Irish Catholic men, and that was principally organized out of the what used to be the Boston College when it was down in the South End before it moved to Chestnut Hill. And so there are a few groups like that, but I would say mainly not named, so that one can really track their histories.
So, you know, with all these stories that you've made reference to, what is it that makes Knox stand out so much that she's been with you for 15 years?
Well, I think it was her courage. I think it was her perseverance. I think it was her model of fighting back against the sort of racial injustice of the time in her own small way. I think her model is a person who supported physical exercise in her own way, riding fast and riding long, and not being daunted by bad weather of any kind, mud, sand, whatever. So I think her model has a lot to say for those of us who are cycling today, and our attempts to increase the level of diversity within the cycling community. There's an organization now just started a couple of years ago called the New England Cycling Coalition for Diversity, and they have that as their explicit goal, to increase diversity within the cycling community. And they're well supported by others, including MassBike, which is the main organization for Massachusetts cyclists.
So your story is very much still timely and prescient.
Oh, it's timely and prescient. And we've got a lot going on with Kitty Knox now. Beyond the book, we've got plays being written in her honor by an organization called Plays in Place. And they've been very active. We've been fundraising for them. They got the scripts written, and we're ready to put up a production, hopefully later on in the fall.
Where can people find out more information about the book, about Kitty?
They can find it out by going to the Mass Bike website, and that'll contain information about Kitty Knox and the plays and the annual ride we do in her honor, which takes off from Mount Auburn Cemetery where she's buried.
When does that?
It happens every year in May.
Okay, so that'll be coming up.
So that'll be coming up
All
very
right.
soon, and we hope to see people there.
All right. Well, you know,
And
you can read Larry's great books and get to learn your history, and then meet up in Cambridge and get some exercise, because we all could use that. It's you know, the weather's changing. Get out there, but always great to have a great local author and a great book, and to have you join us on the show. Thanks for joining us again on the Writer's Block.